evening. I am excited about this night. This is a night that I've been working towards for a few months now. A night that I look forward to hopefully once a month throughout the rest of the year, where I get to invite one of my friends, one of my colleagues, to share their story, help us understand the way that the work that they do intersects with their faith, the way that our faith is relevant to our lives outside even the walls of the church, and particularly as it helps to shape the community around us. That is coming out of part of our vision initiatives that we started when we did our vision process at the end of 2 years ago and the beginning of last year. And one of the things that constantly came out was that we wanted to be a church that helped people to understand the relevance of their faith, the way that the Christian faith intersects with life outside the walls of the church every day. And one of the things we wanted to make sure of was that everyone in our congregation has a sense of what we call vocation, an understanding not just in your career, but a recognition that you are called to do something by the gospel message of Jesus Christ. And so one of the ways that we wanted to instill that within you was by bringing in speakers who could have a chance to share their faith, their story, their work with you. And so I am excited tonight to be able to introduce to you my friend Susan McLarty, who I'm sure some of you know. I first got to know Susan as we were both sitting around the table as part of the Augusta Road Churches United in Ministry. Most of you would know that Arkham, as we call it, is a group of churches from here on down towards I-85, 7 or 8 churches that come together at times to support one another, to share some of the things that are going on in the life of our churches, and to talk about the needs of our community in ways that we can partner together to ideally just be church to the outside world and to show them the love of Christ as we can better collectively than any one of us could as individual churches. As I got to know Susan through that process, it was very clear immediately of her passion for her church, for her faith, and for this city, for her community, and in particular the way that she understood the power of the Spirit of Christ at work within the body of faith to help to shape and to bring up the community, and as we say sometimes, to make the world around us look a little bit more like the kingdom of heaven. Susan McLarty is the first coordinator of the Greenville Homeless Alliance and has held this position since May 1st, 2018. Prior to her current position, she served on the 2016 Affordable Housing Steering Committee for the City of Greenville, the Greenville Homeless Alliance Congregational Relations, and the Greenville Area Interfaith Hospitality Network Board. She's a graduate of the Diversity Leaders Initiative with the Riley Institute at Furman University. She's a member of the Downtown Rotary, and she is a ruling elder with the Presbyterian Church USA, which I just thought was an amazing title that we Free Church Baptists just don't get to embrace auspicious titles like that. But I thought that was a wonderful one, ruling elder. She is also serving on the Student Improvement Council at Wade Hampton High School and is vice chair of the Greenville Housing Authority Board. Susan is married to George, and they have a daughter, Ellis, who attends Wade Hampton High School and the Fine Arts Center. She's a graduate of NC State University. She has worked with Milliken and Company, and for 16 years, she served on the staff at Westminster Presbyterian Church. And I have to say that when I read the article that said that the Greenville Homeless Alliance, was going to be led by Susan McLarty, I knew that it was a loss to our neighbors down the street at Westminster Pres, but I knew that it was a win for our entire city. The Greenville Homeless Alliance is a partnership to broaden support of making homelessness brief and rare. Its mission is to strengthen those partnerships and broaden support in an effort to increase options for individuals or families who are experiencing homelessness and who are seeking stability and a safe, affordable home in Greenville County. The GHA is a coalition that was loosely formed in 2014 in response to an acute increase in homeless individuals drawn to an area of Greenville that became known as Tent City. In 2015, homeless service providers developed a homelessness white paper that outlined a plan to increase the local housing options for homeless individuals and establish priorities for advocacy. In 2016, the coalition began conducting a more thorough data scan to establish benchmarks and goals. They also established a coalition structure and projects to propel momentum. And in 2017, United Ministries was chosen as the host organization for GHA, and based on the experience of similar efforts across the country, having a strong host, they say, is a key success factor to sustaining collective impact initiatives. And then hiring a coordinator, Susan McLarty, in 2018 was the first completed item, followed by a medical respite pilot launching in 2019. Many of you might have read the article about that came out in the Greenville News very recently. The coalition loosely formed in 2015 with 18 partner organizations comprising the Homelessness Leadership Task Force, who reached consensus on the priorities outlined from the white paper. And since then, public, private, and non-profit groups have been working toward more long-term coordinated strategies. And so the GHA has an additional 150 plus individuals working and advocating for a shared vision of safe and affordable homes for all. So tonight it is my privilege to introduce to you Susan McLarty and to invite you to hear from her and then to listen in as she and I have a conversation about homelessness, our faith, and the work of God within our city. Susan, we hear you gladly. Welcome, and we benefit from being with you. Thank you.
It's great to be with you all tonight. I want to just thank Matt. It's been a privilege to know him and also just to be the first in this series. And I know from having known him for some time now that you as a congregation, you are truly blessed from his leadership and his preaching. I give thanks for Matt's friendship and support of me while at Westminster and also as I've moved into this new role. So I want to begin tonight, and I've just brought a card. It went on, I think it went live on United Ministries' website today, but begin with a quote from Father Greg Boyle. He is coming to Greenville on April the 25th as part of the Uniting for Change Luncheon, which United Ministries has sponsored for several years now. He is the founder and CEO of what is called Homeboy Industries. He has dedicated his life to helping Los Angeles' most marginalized individuals find a place in society's ranks. He has become this beacon of hope around the world, and so it's really awesome. He's coming to Greenville. I can't tell you how excited people are about this, so if you want a ticket, grab it quick. Homeboy Industries is now the largest gang intervention, rehab, and reentry program in the world. 15,000 folks enter their doors seeking transformation. And as he puts it, he says, "We are not for those who need help, only those who want it. We don't provide wraparound services, but we are a wraparound community." So that's how I just want to begin our talk tonight and share for you a brief summary about myself. And I have a hunch. I kind of think that maybe many of you here tonight might share this sort of faith story about your own life. But I was born in Kingsport, Tennessee, into a family that included at the time an almost 2-year-old sister and 2 parents. And my parents were both raised in the Presbyterian Church, and my sister and I went on to be baptized and raised as well in the Presbyterian Church. In short, if our church doors were open, we were there. So after college, I landed here in Greenville to work for Milliken, as Matt shared, and later became married to my now husband, George, and we decided to join Westminster, and that was around 1995. So I kind of done a lot of reflecting, and as I look back, I can always say, as many of you I think would also say, you can see that God is always working in our lives and midst. And God was helping me find what I would say is my true self. I first sort of felt this articulated when I read a book around the time later in my career at Milliken that was called Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. And in there's a quote that says, "It is the self planted in us by the God who made us in God's own image, the self that wants nothing more or less than for us to be who we were created to be." So with that sort of nudge, I left the world of textiles in 2003, a career that I enjoyed and found myself traveling the world and was paid well. But I felt that nudge, and I jumped into a new role at Westminster at the time. That was a new role for the church. I really thrived in that and found myself connecting and enjoying connecting with people's passion and finding how that would relate to ministry that the church was seeking to do. And I met some amazing people in our community along the way in that work. Some of those, now looking back, I realized I was most excited about were those families who were receiving a Habitat home, or families who were coming through our church with what we called at the time the GAIN program, and now referred to as the Interfaith Hospitality Network as part of United Ministries. I sort of started to have this aha moment that I wanted to share tonight, which I just wonder if you've ever had something like this happen. So as we were working with the families arriving at Westminster for the GAIN program, there was a time where a family came, and this is after we've been helping in that mission for several years. It was a mom and a dad and 2 children, and they looked a lot like us. And we have one daughter, as Matt mentioned, and she often was excited to help welcome the families. And this time, on the way home in the car from the church, she said, "Mom, I didn't know you could be homeless and have a dad." And that was really enlightening for me, to catch a glimpse of this world through her eyes. So I went on to explain to her, for this particular family, it was a medical issue and a long period of hospitalization that led the family to losing everything and finding themselves homeless. Father Greg Boyle says, "Here is what we seek, a compassion that can stand in awe of what the poor have to carry, rather than stand in judgment at how they carry it." So if I could sum up a lot of what I experienced in my time and my work at Westminster, I would say that each person's story awakened my understanding, both the people within and outside of our church, which led me to standing often in awe. Around 2015, as Matt mentioned, I was appointed by Westminster to join this group of pastors in the Augusta Road area, and that was where I first met Matt. And this group started talking, how could we work collectively together? And we had this great shared history of helping build the Pleasant Valley Connection, which I'm sure many of you remember. The group at the time said, where are we going to focus our efforts now in the community? And housing entered the conversation. We joined with other churches in the downtown area and kind of continued that conversation, inviting both the housing nonprofits as well as foundations and city staff to attend some of our meetings. Also happening at this time, as we heard Matt mention, was a tent city crisis. And Westminster, I can say, was not involved in really addressing that crisis, but we heard from partners like United Ministries and GAIN, who were very much involved and brought those updates to us. And everyone kind of said, something is happening in Greenville that we can't quite put our finger on or articulate well because we don't have data to really say, but we know something is happening and there's a shift in housing in our economy. So as many of you probably know, Greenville has done so much so well. I've seen it change dramatically just since moving here in 1992, but we've shifted ourselves from being this textile-centered economy to now one based on knowledge and advanced manufacturing, tourism, and also many jobs in the service sector. So the City of Greenville's Affordable Housing Committee really helped me understand and have another one of these, what I'll share is like an aha moment with my faith. It became apparent during that process that as recently as 2006, Greenville actually had a surplus of some 800 homes that were affordable to low-income households here. And those now, since 2006, this was 2016 when we're having the committee look at this data, suddenly we have this deficit now of 2,500 homes. So there's been this shift. So now we have a deficit, and these homes are for households earning $20,000 annually, which equates to a rent of about $500 a month. And all of these rentals have not been maintained by property owners, and so they're not maintained, they're also not connected to jobs. And all of this is happening as Greenville, as we've said, was becoming more prosperous. We're seeing our city thrive and grow as that's growing our tax base. So how did this result in something that sort of put the issue right in front of me? Was I was going on a tour with one of our church members who helps run Allen Temple, who provides a number of affordable rentals throughout our community. We were over here in the Pleasant Valley neighborhood, and he stopped at a home of a single mother with 2 children who lived in a home managed by Allen Temple. She could not quite afford the rent that Allen Temple needed to charge, but she had worked at Furman, and she had been in the cleaning services there in a steady employment for about 6 years. So he told me that she, not earning enough money, he still decided to take a bit of a risk and drop his rent down to $500 a month for her, and instead of the $550 he needed. And he said to me, you know, she really, based on her income, would be better off if I charged her $475, but I really am going to have to stick with the $500. That issue sort of crystallized this moment and put a face on it. The data we'd collected revealed a key finding. If employers could just pay their workers $1 or $2 more per hour, much of our current housing crisis, that 2,500 units, would be much less acute. So I started to advocate for this mother. I thought, we've got to fix this. And other citizens whose wages had not kept pace as our rents rose in Greenville. And this kind of started as a whisper, and then it became this loud voice that I just could not ignore. And the question for me was, what are you going to do about this? So I find myself 16 years later taking another leap of faith, again, leaving a job that I enjoyed and decided to step into this new role. So now, instead of serving a congregation, I'm serving Greenville County. So I will say God has been and continues to be present. When I sat down, though, with my pastor and boss, who I know Pat knows well, Lud Weaver, who just retired recently from Westminster, I said, you know, Lud, this is not an easy decision, not easy at all to leave my work with this church, but I've never experienced God present in my life in this way. And there were days and there were even hours in each day where I felt directed down this path, literally. So I'll just share one example. And this was, I was running on the Swamp Rabbit Trail with my daughter at the time, and we were really close to finishing up our run. And, you know, we were on a section of the trail near the children's garden where normally it's like flooded with people. Well, on this particular Sunday afternoon, no one else was around. And we find ourselves almost finished, and I see a man who's walking, and we're still running. And suddenly he literally falls down. And I kind of look around thinking, well, I'm not really medical. Surely there's someone else here that's much better equipped to help him than I am. But there's no one else other than my daughter. So I thought, well, I better be a good parent and show like good responsible parenting and not just ignore him. So I go over and I pick him up and I ask, are you okay? And he tells me he's just been released from the hospital and has nowhere to go. I ask him, what do you need? And he simply says, a home. He proceeds to tell me that he's been in and out of the hospital about 20 times over the last several months. I walk him to a bench and offer to return to my car and get my cell phone. I ask him his name, and he tells me his name, and I say, wait here, Jerry, we'll be right back. Well, we come back with the phone, and Jerry's gone. So I look in my phone, and I think, who can I call that might know Jerry? And I call my friend Susan Fender, and she's someone who worked for the hospital system with people experiencing homelessness, and she happens to pick up the phone. And she says, she knows Jerry. And I'm like, we've lost Jerry. And she said, well, he'll probably turn up. That's not unusual. And she says, don't worry, just go on home. And so I do learn that, he does turn up, and he comes to Triune Mercy Center. And he continues to work with case managers there. And it's people like Robin Barton, who work at Triune, who you may know, who patiently work with Jerry over time now. Fast forward to 2018, and Robin says, I've finally found Jerry a nursing home that will accept him with what he can pay. But it was over 45 minutes away. So she takes him, and guess what? Jerry misses Greenville so much he walks back. And Robin's like, oh my gosh. But she continues to work with Jerry and finds him now somewhere closer to home. So this story, I think, illustrates for some of us, and maybe you're experiencing kind of an aha as well. There are amazing people here in Greenville working what I would call in the trenches. We have this very effective collaboration between our service providers, but when someone is chronically homeless, as Jerry, it's extremely complex and difficult to work towards permanent, stable housing. So effective collaboration is essential, but Deb Richardson-Moore recently said to our city council, this lack of affordable housing now in our city has caused us to hit this wall. So what else has Greenville learned since that city report? I did want to share it's a first ever that our county conducted their own study and they used the same consulting group, and they came up with a different deficit based on the county, exclusive of the city, and that's 9,500 homes. So we're trying to say collectively, we know based on these two different studies, we have a complete deficit, 12,000 homes. And that's for households at 25,000 or below. And this deficit is growing at 550 homes a year. Another way to think about this challenge facing us is consider all the residents in our city. Everyone living in the city of Greenville, which let's put it at around 60,000. We know that that's the number of households in the county whose maximum affordable rent is less than what a for-profit developer needs to break even. That's just another way to think about the challenge. That's a lot of people. Who is most affected by this? Well, it's our elderly, and it's those who are on a fixed income as well. It's single-parent households. And you may ask why. We have data, again, to show you need to earn $30,000 to find anywhere now to live in this county. And it won't be your first choice, maybe not even your second choice, but maybe at $30,000 and up, you will find housing somewhere, and think how large our county is. So when you can't find that, what happens is I might rent something or purchase something lower because what I want is not available. So then this creates what we call this downward pressure. So who gets most affected? It's those families or individuals at the very bottom. So working full-time here in Greenville, you can earn $15,000 annually, and if you're on a disability check, you're going to earn around $9,000. These households have little to no options. And as we've seen, there's not going to be a lot of nonprofit providers able to meet that need and make that difference like we saw in the single mom at Furman. They end up held in this vice by their landlord where they cannot complain if there is mold or other maintenance issues not fixed, because both parties know there's likely nowhere else for them to go. Some people that we've seen recently rent an affordable unit have signed a lease and arrived at the home to find no running water, maybe no heat, or holes in the floor. So my faith has caused me to ask, why is this happening, and why does Greenville still have these two Greenvilles? How can we have gone from 582 students as recently as 2011 in our Greenville County schools experiencing homelessness to almost doubling that last school year at 1,089 students? And the highest number of any one school is right here on Augusta Road at Blythe Academy with 100 students last school year, homeless, right here in our midst. And the highest high school was Greenville High, right here in our midst. Why is our white population increasing within the city and our black population decreasing? We've been tracking Augusta Circle, and it's almost gone to an all-white school. How can 50% then of our chronically homeless individuals be black and the other 50% white? How in 2019 can a white household in Greenville have a median income of $61,000 and a black household of $15,000? And Hispanic at 16. When we ask these questions, we have to say, how can we grow as a community then in an inclusive way? If we believe that we are all created equally in the image of God, how is it we don't all end up equal? Father Greg Boyle says, compassion isn't just about feeling the pain of others, it's about bringing them in towards yourself. If we love what God loves, then in compassion, margins get erased. Be compassionate as God is compassionate means the dismantling of barriers that exclude. My faith has led me to work towards creating a wrap-around community. Greenville is resource-rich in supportive services. We have 650 churches in this county. We can be the beacon of hope. We can make homelessness brief and rare, but it will take all of us working collectively together. My faith aligns with this shared vision, as Matt stated, which is safe, affordable homes for all in our community. How can we as Christians not seek to dismantle the barriers and work together to improve the quality of life for all? If we succeed in this, we will have a healthier, better educated, and more prosperous population and workforce for our future. Mother Teresa used to say, the problem in the world was that we've just forgotten we belong to each other. I think God is telling Greenville, find a way to broaden the circle of compassion so that everybody is included in it. Thank you.
Let me move this stand out of the way real quick. Well, thank you, Susan, for sharing your story with us and sharing your faith and experience. I was blessed to be able to hear it. I loved what you talked about when you talked about that sense of a nudge that you felt from something of the Spirit direction, perhaps, of sort of telling you, calling to you even, saying, you really need to be thinking about what you're doing and how you're doing it and what maybe perhaps even impact you're having on the world around you. And so what I'm interested in particular is asking you about how did you come to a sense of awareness of that? You know, I think as we think about the lessons that the church needs to teach us about how we care for one another and how we follow God's calling. In particular, you talked about all of the times that you were in the church. You were one of those kids just like me, that if the church doors were open, you were pretty much going to be there. It was guaranteed, almost as an expectation more than anything. So maybe even starting back at your childhood, what were the lessons that the church taught you that really became relevant to your even work life as you sort of felt that nudge sort of pushing you in that direction to sort of leave a profitable career in the private sector and go to more of a sort of faith-driven nonprofit work? What were those lessons that you were taught as a child that really took root at that point?
Great question. I would say, sometimes I didn't want to be at church, especially as a teenager.
Yeah.
But I think having that consistency and just showing up translates into so many aspects of your own life. And, that helped me find joy by showing up that I usually thought I wouldn't find. And just meeting a variety of people and experiences that I would have never had otherwise had I not, made that commitment to be there.
Yeah. Talk about some of those people. Who were those sort of mentors in your life? We're particularly a purposefully intergenerational church. We believe that we can all learn from all of the generations that are there, and I know that in my life there have been particular people who, by their example or the lessons that they taught me in Sunday school or youth group, were just truly instrumental into forming me into the person I am today. So who were some of those people for you? What was it about them that really sort of captured you and helped you to understand what you're supposed to be as you follow Christ in this world?
Well, I had some great pastors,
Good.
I must say.
That's good to know.
And I'm still in touch with them today, which has really been a nice kind of always voice to go back to, and a source of encouragement for me as I've tried these different areas of work. And of course, Sunday school teachers, youth advisors. I loved my choir director. Nice. Just took some amazing trips that we really formed close relationships. And then I would say I watched what my parents did. I wouldn't say I didn't view them as influential as my grandparents, though. And my grandparents did not live in Kingsport. They lived in North Carolina. But when we went to visit them, we always went to church. And my grandmother played the piano, and my grandfather had taught Sunday school, like the adult Sunday school class, his entire life until he died at the age of 92. So he just, really, they instilled this kind of lifelong commitment. Yeah.
Well, take me through that process when you felt the nudge and sort of finally came to being at peace with making the sort of leap of faith forward, out of the private sector into the church world, nonprofit world, moving from a long tenure at Westminster into basically starting a new organization from the ground up. That is a huge leap of faith. So what does that spiritual process look like for you? And you may still be wrestling with it today, but what are the things that you sort of feel and do and go through and pray? What does all that look like?
Yeah, so, I think interestingly, kind of both times that this occurred that I can really put my finger on it, because I think partly getting the job right out of college was a bit of just great luck, but I found myself investing my time where I was interested and found, worth and passion around that investment of time. So at Westminster, I had actually served on the personnel committee that crafted the job description that I helped hire someone who ended up not being in that position very long, and then that was when the question came to me, well, would you want to apply then for this position? And so, I think there were just such concrete signs from all elements, but then we put it on paper. Like, we sat down and we ran the numbers, and so that for us, for our family, that was a way that we had to make that decision of what are we giving up, what are we gaining? Yeah. And I will say, we both look back and say, boy, we gave up a lot in a 401k kind of, long time contribution, but you cannot place a value on what you gain by that investment and having that time. There was a lot more flexibility for me to be a mother at that point in my career too. So, and then literally with this most recent change, other stories of just I was contemplating returning and getting a master's degree in divinity, and I had a woman who literally, as I was, having this thought, a stranger just came up to me and she was asked me, what is it you're thinking about? And I sort of got into a conversation. She was like, take that job, go for it. She's like, don't go back to school. And it just felt like there were just moments like that people, and I had text messages that would appear, just a lot of signs. And again, we had to kind of look at it, run the numbers, and it was another decision of returning to more than full-time work.
Right, yes, certainly.
So,
that's great. Well, and I love your sort of sense of awareness of when those signs were coming, because I think that's obviously important as we're making big decisions like that. But I also think that's important as you sort of move into the work that you're doing. So I think a sort of a follow-up to all of that would say, okay, so now that you're in this new venture, that's not just about you and not just about your work, but it's about the entire county and how we can sort of figure out how to thrive together as a community and make that sort of wrap-around community. So where are you seeing God at work now, since you've been on the job since May?
Right.
Where have you already, I hope, seen God start to do some things through the work of the Greenville Homeless Alliance?
Yeah, lots of ways, and so much so that one of my friends, if anyone knows Deborah McKetty, who runs Community Works, she said, I hope you're writing this down. Yeah. But I just, every step of the way, when there's something that I need and I feel overwhelmed, the phone will ring or an email will come in, or just a connection will appear. Yeah. And I just couldn't even say how many times that has happened. Yeah. I do think though, at the same time, God has shown up in people. There was this man that I met in the parking lot of United Ministries, and he was coming in to get assistance with his heat. He lives in a mobile home. And he literally started to cry, and he said, I've never been the one on this side. Mm-hmm. And he said, I've always been the one to be the helper. But he was so grateful. He even brought candy back the next day to say, thank you so much. All you did was walk me in from the parking lot. I didn't know where I was going. But I've also met a Furman graduate, a beautiful young woman, about 25 years old, literally street homeless.
Yeah.
And so those moments are tough.
Certainly. Well, and our city is going through this really unique change. You mentioned that in your talk with us, and you sort of talked about going from a surplus of housing to a major deficit. And when we arrived in 2014, obviously the tent city conversation was going on. The unseen Greenville conversation was beginning to really emerge, and I think it might have even been about 2015 when it really took off, and everybody was having conversations about this sense of two Greenvilles. And I'm part of a doctoral program right now, and I did go back to school still, am in school, and I was talking to some of my colleagues in one of my classes, and they're like, "You live in Greenville. Greenville's awesome. It's a great place to be. It's always on every list that we see of the place to move, no matter what stage of life you're in." And I kind of said, well, yeah, it is for people like me. But it's obviously not the best place for everyone right now, necessarily. And so I know we've sort of moved out of that tent city conversation. The white paper came out. We've moved out of the two Greenvilles, unseen Greenville conversation in a way to sort of ask, okay, what do we do about it now? So what have we learned overall? How far have we come? How far do we still have to go before we can really have that sense of wraparound community where we all thrive together?
Well, so we are making progress. I want everybody to leave here feeling hopeful. And we didn't just land here, in 2014. It was a long, lots of things that led up to that occurring. We have seen the city invest $3.5 million from our own surplus funds, and so that is significant in that all cities across the country traditionally relied on dollars to come from DC and flow into their community to address housing needs. And those dollars have been declining, so we applaud that Greenville has taken this step because it's not easy, and that comes from this kind of, reasons that we're on all these lists winning these awards. We have, as I mentioned, significantly improved our tax base. But what we're seeing is that it actually those incomes that I mentioned that were in the talk, that's actually causing more racial disparity, more inequities, that's creating more tension, I would say, in this overall system. And so we are facing this time where, transportation is a real issue in this community, and that has gotten worse, I would say, since 2014, because more people have been pushed out further from kind of the downtown where we had more of those affordable homes. But another kind of good news of what's happening in the larger picture is the county is now as well making some investment. So any of you that may work for the Greenville Hospital System or Prisma Health now may have followed the settlement with Greenville County. And just last week, an article hit the news where they're taking the first $5 million from that settlement and putting $1 million a year towards housing into their own housing fund for the county. So we got, $5 million over $1 million over 5 years, so $5 million total, and the city at $3.5 million already here.
Good.
So that's really positive news. Good. But it's a big challenge. So really, those of us in this work are how do we leverage to get very significant dollars? And so if you follow, even as close as Charlotte and Charleston have passed bonds in the tune of $20 million, $50 million, because this is, for the city alone, if we were to build our way out of it, a $250 million challenge. So
that's huge.
So a lot of, we feel like we have more room to grow, and we want to see this occur as an annual investment from both our city and our county.
Good. Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I was glad you mentioned some of the people in your talk and in sort of our conversation right here that a lot of times some of us have a stereotype when we hear the word homeless. And we're not even necessarily just talking about homelessness. We're obviously talking about affordable housing. And so, once again, when you think about the things that go into someone being caught in sometimes the cycle of poverty and the cycle of homelessness, you might have a stereotype in your mind of unemployment or mental health or substance abuse and stuff like that, but there's so many other contributing factors that go into it. And I think about, in particular, you mentioned the Furman graduate, the Furman student, and we often think of the people that are necessary to make our city great, to make our city run. And it's not just people who have nowhere else to go necessarily, but we also are talking about our police officers, our firefighters, our teachers, our EMS workers, hospital workers, our restaurant staffs, and things. Everybody, Greenville's turning into a food town, right? But a lot of the people who are working in the restaurants might not necessarily be able to afford to live there, and at the same time, you've got transportation issues, and how do people get from one place to another? In our congregation, even, we're having conversations about the property values going up, which to some people is wonderful, but that's driving the tax value up as well, and some people who have been in the neighborhood forever are suddenly wondering if they can still afford to live there. And so there's just so many of these other contributing factors that go into this, and you mentioned the $250 million problem that it becomes that we need solutions for. And obviously there's not one person, not one solution, not one sort of catch-all silver bullet.
Right.
But you mentioned Greenville Homeless Alliance, particularly focusing on collaborative partnerships. So what does good collaboration to address those types of things really look like?
Right, so the medical respite is a great example to say, when we looked at this system of homelessness, what were the gaps in that system? And that was identified because we're very, as I said, well-resourced. We have more shelter beds in this county than any other county around us, but we didn't have the ability for someone to come into shelter and be cared for if they had a medical need. So they might be released from the hospital because the hospital can no longer keep the person. If they can only return to the street, then they come right back into the hospital because they aren't allowed that time to heal like any of us would want, at your own home. So that's what we're seeking, or what are these solutions that will help fill those gaps, use our resources more wisely, and also when you're doing that, you're allowing that time for that relationship to build with that person when they're being cared for, in that medical situation, that hopefully, as the article highlighted, you can connect someone then to that next step to work towards that long-term permanent housing and stability. So that's a great example. That's what we're trying to glean across the country. What are those ways that we can introduce into our system? Another one that I would love to just share a little bit about that we'll be hearing more about soon is what's called permanent supportive housing. And if you're familiar, like I talked about the guy Jerry, so Jerry would have benefited from the respite care had we had that at the time. Jerry would also benefit from what's called permanent supportive housing because he has some mental disabilities and also some physical disabilities as well. And so that's a very specialized type of housing that helps bring people off the streets who may have been on the streets 20 or more years. And we have a very successful example of a small type of that type of housing in Greenville over near like Project Host Soup Kitchen. Y'all are familiar, it's right across the street. It's called Reedy Place.
Yes.
So we're excited that United Housing Connections that built and manages that is going to build more of that type of housing, and they're just launched a campaign. And again, I hope you'll hear more about and find ways that you might want to support it or learn more about it. But that saves your community the most dollars, that type of housing.
Yeah, certainly. And I think in particular about how close this issue comes to our congregation, because obviously when you speak about the schools in our county that have the largest population of homeless students, you talked about Blythe and you talked about Greenville High School, which are basically a mile to a mile and a half in either direction of our congregation. And so as a pastor, I'm sitting here saying this is not just an economic problem. This is not a political problem. This is a faith problem. This is something where if we're called to be the best possible neighbor that we can be as we seek to bear witness to Jesus Christ, then this is our problem. This is something that we have to recognize. And we sit here in the midst of the Augusta Road neighborhood, which by all accounts is a desirable neighborhood, right? That's what everybody says about it. It's a desirable neighborhood. And we need to be responsible for reminding ourselves, as Father Boyle quotes Mother Teresa, that we do in fact belong together. He speaks sometimes about this sense of mutuality with people. He says that you need to draw a circle of compassion and then imagine that there's nobody outside of it. So how do we as people of faith start to move from where we are to a place of mutuality, and kinship is often the word that he uses? How do we get there as people of faith, do you think?
Well, I think there's lots of ways, and so hopefully, you might find something that kind of suits, again, like your passion, your interest. But a few good ones that we've seen is all the schools that I mentioned, Augusta Circle, Blythe, Hughes, I didn't mention Hughes, but they do have a number of students experiencing homelessness as well, offer a mentor program. And so Mentor Upstate is a wonderful organization. If you're not familiar with it, they'll get you trained and help. And so that's a way that, as we see this disparity in socioeconomics, it's hard for us to find those intersections as well as others in our community where we can meet each other and realize, that we have everything in common, really nothing different. Yeah. So that's a great way to start. I was struck by the new principal at Augusta Circle, if you all know her, said that she did some home visits over the summer, and while they only had one child last school year experience homelessness, she was struck by the state of the homes of the students she went to visit. And so when I talked about, that our affordable units have not been maintained, many of them by property owners, maybe there's a handyman's group that wants to just do some simple things to help improve a home that's literally, potentially across the street or tucked into your neighborhood here. And then what I've talked to a lot of people about, Greenville's got this great success story, and many reasons we have that is we've got this awesome engaged citizens who show up for things and help influence our policymakers, and that would be our city council and our county council. And so if you are so willing, we would love to see any and all of you show up for any time there's an important vote that will happen affecting housing or transportation. And we're seeing, like those examples that I shared, that's happening because people are showing up. And it makes a difference to those making decisions.
Yeah. So speak more, not necessarily to the voting aspect of things, because we obviously, when it comes time to elect our officials, that's when we pay attention to what are their positions on the issues and things like that. But what are the conversations that are going to be happening in our city in the next couple of years even necessarily, that we need to be paying attention to, again, not just from a political perspective, because I'm sure we all have our own sort of political leanings on things, not just from a property value perspective, but that we really need to say we need to have a faith perspective on this issue that we might not necessarily think, that's a faith issue for me. What are some of those conversations that might be happening, do you think?
Well, kind of central to, like, if you think that it matters that you have a home to go to tonight when it's going to be, in the 20s or something, so really cold. And if you think that matters to you, and why would that then be important for anyone else to have the ability to thrive in our city, I would say please pay attention to what's called the comprehensive planning process. And this was not something that I participated in when it happened 10 years ago, but it only happens every 10 years. I do think I remember receiving some communication being like, oh, what's that all about? We're all busy. But this is so critical. Greenville, the city's plan, is going to determine our pattern of growth for the next 20 years. So they've chosen to look 20 years out. The county is running this concurrently at the same time and looking 10 years out. Interesting point about the county that I think, those of us, living in the city, I live in the city as well, 2/3 of our county is not zoned. So if you care about, let's say, the environment or protecting open green space, and you think about 2/3 of the county not being zoned, sharing, what's important to you relating to housing, transportation, really whatever issue, honestly, if it's domestic violence, if it's helping people overcome addiction, a home is going to be kind of the central point in that to create that stability for someone to overcome whatever you may care about. And we don't want to see Greenville grow like Atlanta or Charlotte. And so if you
Nobody wants to be Atlanta. I think we can all agree with that one, right?
and honestly, we're having conversations that our home builders are watching how we're growing, and we are following their trend exactly. So if you care about that not happening 20 years from now, please show up this summer. That's when a lot of those meetings, but the county has meetings even next month.
Yeah, good. Thank you. So as you're starting this again, you've already got a great footing with this organization, and you're already getting it rolling as probably only you would have been able to do. But what are your dreams, not just for the Greenville Homeless Alliance, but what are your particular dreams that your work will help make our city thrive? What are your dreams for the future of our city?
So one simple dream that I have, and it seems logical, if we can make our city and our county a place where your job is located close to your home, and those other essential things that you need to function, your medical, to be able to exercise, to go to the grocery store, if all those things are close to your home, we would see a thriving community with less traffic on our roads, so less that we are going to pay as taxpayers, higher employment retention, and children, who would not be experiencing homelessness. So we've studied communities, Maryland County, in Montgomery County, in Maryland, has effectively done this, and they have the highest graduation rate in our country. So we know if Greenville County could simply raise our graduation rate by only 3%, we would see an economic return of like $900,000 per student per year.
Wow. That's pretty amazing.
So there's such a positive return that I think that's my dream, and on the flip side of that is when that occurs, children are not having to wonder, where's their next meal coming from? Where am I going to sleep tonight? And just a lot of other negative side effects that children should not have to endure.
Absolutely. Well, Susan, I'm grateful for your time. Thank you for sharing your story, your faith, your passion. I look forward to our next conversation on February 20th. It's going to be with Carrie Nettles of the Julie Valentine Center and the work that she does as one of their chaplains in working with those who are dealing with abusive situations and how we as the church might be able to even be a part of the work to preventing those as we seek to bless the children and give them a story of faith and a foundation that helps them to know of God's love, even when other love might be difficult for them to see. But Susan, thank you so much. Join me in thanking Susan McLarty for coming to be with us tonight. We really, truly appreciate it. Thank you. And thank you. You're dismissed.